Daniel Sports Central, we go over our next schedule preview this offseason, and it's going to be for the Ohio State Buckeyes, one of the top teams in the Big Ten in the 2021 season, and kind of a disappointment of a season for the Buckeyes. Of course, this is a football team that's so used to being in the Big Ten championship and in the college football playoff that I'm sure it was a bit of a disappointment when this team was in neither last year. But will this team bounce back in 2022, and will they be in the college football playoff next season? Is what we'll be going over here today. We'll be going over the players this team will be losing, who they'll be returning, and also looking at their schedule for the first time this offseason, starting out with some notable games from last year. And this is a football team that in September, they kind of started out the season a bit slow, lost to Oregon in week 2, and a lot of people were questioning whether or not this team would be for real. But let me tell you, they improved a lot over the course of the season, especially from later September into like November. And of course, that Michigan loss was the other tough loss of the season. But this team after that loss to Oregon really progressively got better and better to a point where they beat number 7 Michigan State 56-7. They just demolished the Spartans in that game. That was quite a game there. But the main turning point I think for Ohio State last year was that Maryland game on October 9th. They beat them 66-17, and after that, this team went on a huge hot streak. They beat Penn State, beat Purdue, and once again that Michigan State game where they just destroyed the Spartans. Did lose to Michigan. I'm sure that was a brutal loss for Ohio State. 27-42 was the final score there, but it was the Wolverines' year last year, so got to give them credit for a great season. But for Ohio State, I would favor this team going into that Michigan game next season. I think with it being in Columbus next year, Ohio State's got, I'd say, somewhat better returning production. Michigan's got some great returning production as well, but Ohio State I'm a bit more confident in with the returning production going into next season, and the recruiting as well looks excellent for the Buckeyes. But first 6 games, this team was 5-1. Last 7, they were 6-1, and your overall record was 11-2 last season. And let me tell you, just about for any college football team, 11 wins would be an outstanding season. For the Buckeyes, of course, once again, being a team that's so used to being in the Big Ten title game and in the college football playoff, kind of a disappointment of a season for the Buckeyes. But this team has got a very good chance of being in both of them once again next year. Let me tell you, just based on the returning production, this team with their quarterback, of course, C.J. Stroud coming back, 4,400 yards on the season, 44 touchdowns, 6 interceptions. Just an outstanding season for C.J. Stroud. Definitely a player to keep an eye on going into next season. He also had a 72% completion rate, so his accuracy was outstanding last season, and his stats in general were excellent. So once again, keep an eye on him. Definitely Heisman contender going into next season. I really like where C.J. Stroud is headed. And by the way, last year was just his first year as a starting quarterback. So, in college, that's definitely something to keep in mind is how well he played considering those circumstances. The backfield looks excellent as well for the Buckeyes. You got, of course, Travion Henderson coming back, 1,500 yards, 19 touchdowns. And then, of course, Mayan Williams also coming back, 580 yards and 3 touchdowns on the year. So both of those running backs combined got over 2,100 yards on the season, 22 touchdowns as well. So, the backfield looks excellent going to next season. I really like where this offense is headed. And, of course, you could say, of course, the receivers, you're losing 2 outstanding football players in Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave. But Jackson Smith-Njigba, this was a major surprise of this college football season. He's potentially the best receiver in the nation. Just looking at how he played last year and how explosive he was, 1,600 yards, 9 touchdowns of receiving, just incredible what he did last season. And this receiving core in general, if you look at Michigan State, that's the reason I kind of had a feeling going into that Michigan State game where the Spartans, their main weakness is in the defensive secondary, and Ohio State's big 3 with Njigba and Olave and Garrett Wilson. Just an insane trio there of receivers, and something that's incredibly rare to get 3 receivers of that caliber in one receiving core at one time. But they do lose 2 there. Of course, Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave once again will be gone next year, but I'm not too concerned. Jackson Smith-Njigba is going to be an outstanding receiver next year. Definitely a player to keep an eye on. And if you look at the NFL and say Cooper Kupp or Devontae Adams, for example, that's kind of like Jackson Smith-Njigba in college football going into next season. He's going to be an outstanding player, and he already is, but he's going to keep getting better, which is the best part. But looking at, once again, the backfield looks excellent. Master Teague is taken off, though, but then again, he was the 3rd in the backfield, so not too concerning. You do lose Jeremy Ruckert, your tight end last year, and of course, he was 4th in receiving on the team, and you also lose 2 offensive linemen, 3 defensive linemen, and you also lose 2 in the secondary, so something to definitely keep an eye on as well. Defensively, you do lose a few key players. But this team overall, return production looks really good, I'd say, going into next year. I really like the depth on this team. And once again, recruiting is excellent. But chances at college football playoff run in 2022, I would say, are extremely high for the Buckeyes. This team is probably my favorite right now to win the Big Ten. I mean, the Big Ten East is always super competitive, and I don't expect it to be any different next year. I think Michigan and Ohio State are probably your top two once again in the Big Ten East next year. I mean, Michigan looks excellent too in the returning production, so can't lie there. But Ohio State, I like this team a bit better. I think this team, if they gain a little bit of experience, which they will, definitely I think is going to be a great sign for the future of this football team. Your transfer portal and recruiting going into next season, of course, you got a few players taken off. That's for sure. You got Jack Miller, of course, who is off to Florida. Quinn Edwards is going to Texas. So you got two quarterbacks who are taken off there, and then Tanner McAllister, defensive back, is going to Ohio State, or is coming in from Oklahoma State, and he's an outstanding defensive back. So definitely that's going to be a great addition to this defensive back core for sure. And then you got Ryan Watts, of course, who is off to Texas as well. Craig Young, a safety, is going to Kansas, and Seven Banks is also in the transfer portal. Not sure where he's headed quite yet. Recruiting-wise, this team is ranked number 4 in the nation, so that's definitely a positive. Big Ten rank, they're actually number 1 in the Big Ten once again, and they got 2 5-star recruits coming in, 17 4-stars. So recruiting, once again, looks great for this football team, number 4 in the nation. Can't complain with that a single bit. But let's look at your schedule now for this football team going into next season. You got, of course, Notre Dame to start off the year. That's going to be quite a game to start off the season against the Fighting Irish. I don't know about Notre Dame next year. That's a team that I've got a few uncertainties about for sure. We'll see what happens. That'll be a fun one for sure in Columbus. Arkansas State on the 10th, and you got Toledo, Wisconsin to follow. So Wisconsin's your first Big Ten game there. Then you got Rutgers the next game to start off your October. Michigan State on the road, Iowa at home, Penn State on the road. And then for your November, you got Northwestern on the road, Indiana, Maryland, and then Michigan to finish out the season. Looking at your first 6 games here, Notre Dame, I'm going to favor this team against the Fighting Irish. Once again, Notre Dame's kind of a team that usually is a big contender, and they have been for multiple years in a row, but Notre Dame does have a few question marks for sure going into next season, so I'm not quite as confident on them. So I do favor Ohio State in the game, although it more than likely will be a very close matchup and a great matchup as well. Arkansas State, Toledo, both easy wins. Wisconsin, I'm going to favor Ohio State in that game as well, but it's definitely going to be a close one. Wisconsin should be a pretty good team next year. And then Rutgers, of course, easy win. Michigan State on the road. I mean, you never know about the Spartans. That's a football team that does lose Kenneth Walker, who is a player that I think is pretty responsible for a good chunk of the success of the offense. So, I mean, Michigan State, and that's just kind of the start of it. But, I mean, Michigan State, they're going to be a good team next year. I'm not quite sure they'll be better than how they were last year, but that's still going to be a tough game on the road. So I'm going to keep it as a close one, but I'm going to still favor Ohio State. And looking at the second half of your schedule, Iowa, Penn State, both close ones, but I do favor Ohio State. Northwestern, Indiana, both easy wins. Northwestern being on the road, but then again, the Wildcats are kind of a mess right now. And Indiana, of course, I mean, a 2-10 football team last year, which was incredibly surprising, and they're losing a decent amount. So Indiana, kind of uncertain about them as well. But the 2 games finish out the season. Maryland, of course, on the road, and Michigan to finish out the season. I do favor Ohio State in both those games as well. That Michigan game is probably right around that 50-50 mark. But I'm going to favor Ohio State slightly in that Michigan game for now. The Wolverines are going to be a good team once again next year, and I do expect that game to come down to, I mean, potentially that's your Big Ten East championship once again at the end of the season there between Ohio State and Michigan. So, I mean, obviously it's always a crucial game, and I would say the best rivalry in all of college football if you ask me. But, yeah, definitely it'll be quite a game once again. So a lot to look forward to for the Buckeyes going into next year. But your record prediction, 11-1 to 12-0 for the Buckeyes. And once again, I'll be predicting Ohio State's schedule game by game once we get to our official predictions in the later spring and into summer. So stay tuned for that. But that being said, let me know your thoughts in the comments below on the Buckeyes. And I appreciate you guys all watching as always. Stay tuned for more from All Sports Central. Catch you on the next one.